time for the live recording here on Facebook of the Be Bold You podcast with Cyndilu. And my guest today is Shereese Thompson Floyd of Storymakers Consulting. Yes, I'm so excited to have Shereese with us today. Yay, yay, yay.
Oh my
Have
God.
you ever wanted to share your story, yet you're feeling like it might be too much for people to hear? Are you wondering, is there a way to share that makes the story impactful every time? Do you wonder if you really need a brand story? Shereese is going to help us to see how we can turn our life stories into our brand stories that matter and make an impact too. Welcome, Shereese, to the show.
Yay, I feel like I should do a dance. I'm so excited to talk to you today, Cindy. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
It's so exciting to have now tell the people where you are. I'm in New Zealand and it's the 25th for me, and you are?
I am in Norfolk, Virginia, and it's the 24th for me.
Yeah. So she got confused because she looked at my advertising, which has both dates and both times, and she saw the one time, which is my today, her tomorrow, and she's like, "Oh, it's not till tomorrow." I'm like, "No, it's today." And here we are. That's
Here we
the
are.
joy of on the other side of the planet, away from everybody that I grew up with. But I'm an East Coast girl, Northeast, New
Yay.
Hampshire, Vermont. So yeah, yay
Awesome.
Northeast, or yay East Coast. So
Awesome.
what's the weather like right now for you? You're in like
It,
your nice time of year.
it is. One thing I love about living in Virginia is that the weather fluctuates so much. Since yesterday, it was like 50 degrees, almost 60 degrees, and today it's kind of low 40s. So it gets colder at night into the 20s. But I love this weather so much, where it's sunny outside right now, and it's just the crispness in the air, and yeah, it's really beautiful, really great.
That's awesome. All right. I'm going to ask you 10 questions first so we can kind of get to know you. You've not been on the show before, so I would love to ask you my 10 questions.
Okay.
And the first one is, are you introverted or extroverted?
My natural nature is introverted. I love spending time with myself, away from people, but I play an extrovert on TV or on shows like this.
Right? You bring it to the table. You bring it. And do you have a favorite color?
I do. It's red.
Red. That is that's a powerful, bold color, girl. What energizes you?
Oh my gosh. What energizes me, I love um, seeing people work through their differences and getting along and trying to make a better world. I love that so much. I'm a huge crier, but it gets me going that we can actually move to a utopia of sorts. So yeah, I would
Yeah,
say that.
we share that. We share that desire that we can all just get along, people. Just get along. Okay. What is the most exotic place you've ever visited?
Oh, see, I don't travel that much. I'm
So it might
gonna,
be down one.
you know, I'm gonna say Chicago in January, not realizing that my Virginia January coat was not going to be sufficient in Chicago's January. I would say that was it.
Those who are listening to this podcast, you're not seeing my face. Not at all. I have been to Chicago in the winter. It is not a fun place to go in the winter. I'm sorry for all of you who live in Chicago, but I'm not coming back in the winter ever. Well, unless God says definitely go, but it would
Yeah.
have to be like he'd have to like pick me up and plant me down there or something. I'm not sure. I should be careful though. Sometimes when I say stuff like that, it happens.
Mhm.
What is the phrase or quote that encourages you the most?
Oh my gosh. Be yourself. Everyone else is taken.
I love that one. Mr. Oscar Wilde, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. What has been your favorite age?
I don't know if I've gotten there yet. Um,
Nice. I
yeah, I
like
don't
that
know.
answer.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm still enjoying the journey.
Yeah.
And are you a book reader?
I am.
What book are you reading now then?
I am actually listening to a book on tape. It's called Untamed. And I'm gonna forget her name. Glennon something. I can't remember her name, but her book is great. I'm a bad plugger, but yeah, that's what I'm listening to right now. Glennon Doyle, I
Is
think.
that a fictional or
It is nonfiction.
nonfiction? What is it talking about? It sounds very interesting.
Talking about she is encouraging people to live their authentic lives, and she's taking you through her life story and how she was able to break out of the shell of perfection and expectation and get to her true self.
So, and it's by Glennon Doyle for those who are looking for it. Did go find it real quick.
Yeah, it's really
Now I got to
great.
get back to the question. Awesome. And do you create to live or live to create?
I live to create.
Yay. And name the person who's had the most influence on your life, and they can be dead or alive.
I would say it was my grandfather. He passed about 6 or 7 years ago. He was my favorite person on the planet. I often say he's the only person who's never disappointing me, but he was the one who taught me the idea of doing something nice for someone every day. He said if he could do something nice for someone every day at the end of the day, then he knew that he had done his job. So my grandfather.
Cool. And what one word describes you best?
Creative.
Yay. That's why you and I connected like immediately. I was like, yeah. Alrighty. Those are my lovely Big Ten questions.
Okay, I
Now,
see. Yay.
so I have this Be Bold You and Becoming Bold You,
Mhm.
which the show is sponsored by the book. Oh, I do have the book here to show to the people who are watching Becoming Bold You. And folks can get that by going on over to Amazon to pick it up. And it's all about who we become in the world and who we want to show up as. And part of showing up in the world is our brand story. Is
Mhm.
like, what are we putting out for the world to see us as? That was one of the
Mhm.
reasons I want to have you on because, how we show up in the world isn't just our personalities. It's not just who we are. It's how we present ourselves to be and the perception that others then are seeing us from, or the perspective that others are seeing. And that's going to come from their understanding. So how do we make a brand story to accurately reflect us and make an impact on the world? That was a lot. You got a lot to answer there. Yeah. You can pick
I
one thing and talk about that.
well, it really starts with going back to who you are authentically. When we um I- I'll start from a life standpoint because not everybody has a business, but whether you see it as a brand story or not, every time that you get up in the morning and step out into the world, you are a brand in the way that people experience you. You are a brand in how you carry yourself, how you present yourself to the world. And if I was to ask you a question right now, who's the nicest person that you know? Or who is the meanest person that you know? You could conjure up someone because that is a part of their brand. So who you are authentically and how you treat people and how you go about your day, it's all collectively a part of your brand. Now, when you start a business, all of that comes into the business. And it is up to us to figure out how much of that is the underscore of the business. If our business is a personal brand, then that means that the decisions and the look and the feel comes through who we are, our values, our belief systems, what we believe in, what we stand for, all those types of things. But if you're not necessarily the face of the brand, then your story becomes the foundation. Whether you are the face or not, it is the foundation. But when you're not the face, it's the foundation of the brand where people are exercising whatever they're doing, how they're going out into the world and making your vision come true. They're doing that through whatever your vision for the world is or was. So personal branding is really and truly about who we are authentically, our values and belief systems, and how we use that to then grow in life, whether you're climbing the corporate ladder, can't even get that out, or growing a business, whether you're attracting people to you because that you have those similar values that they also have.
When do you decide? I'm going to take a time out here.
Okay.
I'm going to edit this out of the video. Because we're on beLive, you're kind of looking off. So I want you to look to your camera because I want to make this really good so that you can see it. So keep looking closer.
All right.
So you see a light? Do you see a light? That one.
I'm not on the right camera. That's why. Okay.
I'm supposed to camera. Do you want to switch camera?
Yeah. Let me see if I can. Because I'm so.
So you go to. That's all right. We're going to teach you live. I have live online learning. It's what I do. There should be a gear wheel there.
That says the one that says camera. Or
yep.
Oh no, it's gear. And then there we go.
There we go. I'm actually gonna have you do that question again because I want you to come out of this and for folks that are watching this, when I have you on, I want you guys to come out with having something you can use on your page. So I'm gonna ask you to repeat that again if you don't mind. I'm gonna put you back on solo mode and then we'll just start. It's all right. It's all good. Okay, so timeout over as far as the recording. So
okay. Thanks for doing that. I didn't even realize I was on her. Thank you.
Yeah. I was like, yeah. I'm like, anyway, we'll talk about that later. All right. So you're answering the same question. Do you remember what it was?
No. What was it?
How does the brand story make an impact and how do you use your brand story? Yeah. You just talk about what you do and you don't worry about it because you'll be freaking fabulous. Go.
So whether you know it or not, every one of us has a personal brand in the way that people experience us. So every day that we get up and go out into the world, we are branding ourselves. If I were to ask you right now, who is the nicest person you know, or who is the meanest person that you know, you probably can conjure up someone. And someone is probably having a thought in relation to how they take you on during the day or during the night or whatever. So we are already a personal brand. If we are using that personal brand for just life in general, it is the way that we interact with the world. It is the way that we climb the corporate ladder. It is the way that we give back to the world. But when it comes into your business, when we get in business to solve a problem. But even as a brand, there has to be a reason behind why you want to solve that problem. And so ultimately, your story becomes the vision of the business. And so your values and belief systems become the foundation by which that business is being run. And so that personal brand or branding in general becomes really important for the impact that you make because it allows your audience to see you as truly the solution to their problem, not only as a transaction, but as a relationship. because they can experience you as a brand, they can trust you, and they can feel like they absolutely know you. And then that becomes something beyond just a customer relationship and moves them into long-term sustainability as ambassadors and people who will talk about your brand all the time.
Oh my gosh. I'm trying to push the button. It won't go. Oh, because I'm pushing the wrong one. Oh my goodness. Too funny. I want to know, when do you decide whether or not you're the personal brand, or there's a story or a business? Like, how do you know if you're the, you know what I'm saying? Like, because everybody says, build your brand, build your brand, build your brand. But how do I know? So I have Cyndilu, which is
Mhm,
me, right? And then I have beBOLDyou.
mhm,
They've become somewhat synonymous.
mhm,
As in, if you look up beBOLDyou, my face is going to show up. If you look Cyndilu up, beBOLDyou is going to show up. So like, it
mhm.
doesn't matter now which one. So does that mean that I've actually done a good job at branding both together and making them like meld? Is that something that, is that what the personal brand is? It's kind of like your story and you become one.
That's exactly right. That means that you have done a good job. And if you think about if you think about um, where we are right now compared to where we may have been 30, 40 years ago, when you think about brands, we know the names of CEOs behind the brand. We know Jeff Bezos. We know Elon Musk. We know Richard Branson. We know then Steve Jobs, who I believe is probably the catalyst. I'm sure there it was happening before him, but he's probably that turning point where the person who's running the company is actually the face of the company. Before, it was just the company, and the product or the service did all the work. The cool thing about the person coming out front is because now we get to know, why did they start the business? What was it about the world, and what difference did they want to make in the world? And we can see them and we feel like we know them and we can trust them. The fastest way that we trust them is by them telling us their story. And so the brand becomes really a part of our culture. When we look at all the brands that we have around us, we have bought into some sort of story by the types of brands that we buy. And it becomes like much more, again, much more transactional and much more relational when we know the face. And the way people determine this is really, how do they what do they want to be known for? Many of us in the online space and beyond, we have our businesses, but we also want, as you said, if I was to Google Cyndilu and beBOLD comes up, that tells me that Cyndilu has built beBOLD, and you can't think of beBOLD without thinking of Cyndilu. So it just depends on what people want to be known for. How do they want their businesses to be known? We all don't have to be the face of our business, but if we're not the face of our business, there still has to be a brand story that helps guide the foundation of the business.
Okay. So what made you want to, I mean, since we're talking about this, why Storymakers? Why Storymakers?
For me, it became, oh, there's so much into that story, but I have to say, had my husband went to prison back in 2003. And I had an experience in that relationship where I got lost in his narrative and I felt invisible in my own life. And I had a very interesting experience, very innocuous experience with watching the US Olympic team 4x4 relay, and the women are running around the track. And in the last leg, the woman dropped the baton and I started to cry. And what I realized is as I watched these women run around this track and drop this baton, I felt like it was an illustration of my life. And I felt like I wasn't strong as this runner who picked up this baton despite national shame and embarrassment and kept going. I felt like I was more of the baton. And I realized in that moment that I wasn't who I was supposed to be. I wasn't my authentic self. I was completely submerged in someone else's story. And the more that this started to play out for me, I realized that I had a voice in this relationship. I realized because I didn't know anybody like me that it was something that needed to be told. And I started to tell the story and people started to come and I built something from that story. And it's because of that story and me deciding to share my voice that I even can sit here right now because I realized that being invisible is our default position. And no one on this planet should ever feel like that their voice and their story doesn't matter. And once I got out of my own muck, if you will, I started doing this work for nonprofits and corporations. And then now I do it for entrepreneurs, still corporations as well. But it is the fire that is within me to get people to be seen, because the more that we share our stories, I believe it's really truly the one way that we will save this world. And so that's why I ended up at Storymakers.
That's awesome. I love that story. Oh my gosh, girl. That day when we realized we're living in someone else's story is
Mhm.
so important, you know. People talk about all the time, you know, be your authentic self, be your authentic self. And that's really it. It's
Mhm.
that transition from living in somebody else's story, from believing somebody else's belief, from living our life out of what others have told us we're supposed to be, to
Mhm.
deciding, no, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is where I'm going in life.
Right.
Um, my favorite thing is to hear that a Christian is having a crisis of belief. I'm like,
Mhm.
yes, because when
Yes.
they come out on the other side with their own belief, it's no longer what mama said, what daddy said, what, you know, the preacher said, what the church said. It's who they believe God is for themselves. And
Yeah.
once you make that shift, there's no going back. Like it's now yours and you can own it. So the
Mhm.
same thing with our story when we're living somebody else's narrative, which I did for years. And I partially chose to do that, right? I chose to be the wife, I chose to be the mama. We wake up one day in that place going, is this who I want to continue to be in the world? Or is
Right.
it time for me to find a bit more of who I want to be and how I
Mhm.
want to show up in the world? Yeah, it's completely, you hit a chord, girl, because it was like, "Oh my goodness." Yeah,
Yeah.
that was an amazing, revelation, like, I didn't feel like I lost my identity, I felt like my identity was changing due to the new
Yeah.
season,
Mhm. Exactly.
that I was
Ex
stepping into my own identity and not the identity of so and so's wife or so and so's mama, right?
Mhm.
Because I'd always been little Joey's
Yeah.
mama. I don't know little
Yeah.
Joey, but if I had a little Joey, you know, so yeah. So how do we when we make that breakaway and
Mhm.
we realize that this is our authentic self, how do we craft that story? Or does it need to be crafted? Or do we simply live it out and it becomes part of who we are? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. And that is the make and the makers part of the name, because it does need to be crafted. It's not our story is the history, but the brand story is what's actually crafted. Like your full history is not the brand story. And so I usually with clients use what I call, it's a 3-part process because it's easier for people to kind of get it. But we go through a process of first discovering, because when you first understand or have that awareness that life is not where you want it to be, or there's something more for you, it is huge, and you don't know how to get to your authentic self because we have been layered on for years. And so it is a matter of peeling back that. So there's the discovery phase where you're going through your life experiences and just kind of free dumping them. I have my clients, just whatever experience comes to mind, you just write it down and give me an emotion. What were you thinking and feeling when you were having that type of experience? The reason that we're doing that is because when it comes to a point that you're going to speak any of these experiences, or you're going to write these experiences, if I asked you to tell me a story on when you felt unworthy, you now have a list of experiences that you can go through and be like, which one of them made me feel unworthy? So it kind of puts it into some sort of context. And then after we have those experiences, then we're going to shape them into a sellable product, because our stories are a product. People do buy our stories, even when they're used for business. People will pay us to hear our stories. So we shape them into a sellable product by then saying, okay, what is it that we want to do with the story? How is it that we want to move people? Is this our origin story? Is this the story of us, of me? Then what set of experiences tell the story of me? And so then we go through a process of shaping those stories. And then the final phase is just sharing it into the world. Where are we going to share them? What do we want to use them for? And how do we want to make an impact with them? So there is, a process of refining the story to keep our stories succinct, to keep them impactful, and to actually move people to action. But for some people who have, kind of like, oh, I want to be authentic, and they'll just tell you the story. And you're like, okay, but what does that have to do with me? You have to be careful to understand that the story was never about you. It's your experience, but the lesson that you learn from it belongs to your audience. So the story is not about you per se. It is about what did you do to be able to help your audience. Oh.
The lesson that you learned doesn't belong to you. Ooh, girl. Can you meet that out a little bit?
Yeah. I believe that we're all here to make a difference. There are people who we are actually assigned to take them through their next level of life. Our stories don't define who we are as individuals, but our stories and the experiences that we have, when we tell them, they help other people define themselves. They help other people realize that they're not alone, that they can get through it, that they can achieve something, that they are greater than they thought they were. Our story, that experience and that lesson is put out into the world so someone else can attach to it and know that they are going to be okay. And so we experience it because it becomes a part of how we're going to teach the world. It's our training, so to speak. But once we get it, now we use that to help those people that we're here to train.
How do we know we're telling the right story, though? Like, how do we know we're telling the story they need to hear?
Well, it depends on what is the impact that you are trying to make. And it also depends on where you're telling the story. So it's not just one story. We have a myriad of stories. We live our stories every single day. There's about 6 stories that I like to put in a marketing portfolio that will change. Your origin story is who you are. It's always who you are. It's like any other superhero. They all have an origin story. You have an origin story. That is never going to change. That is your greatest hits. It is the thing that people love to hear. Where did you come from? Why are you doing this? Why is this important to you? Who do you serve? What is the success that you create in the world? And you note how there are superheroes that kind of have superpowers that overlap, but their origin stories are completely different. That is on purpose, because now we can determine which one of those superheroes that we align with based on what their story is. Absolute same thing for us as individuals. So we have that story. Then we have the stories of the value that we bring, which I like to call a value story. The value that your product or service has. How does that product or service make people better? Then there's the story of your true purpose. What are you moving towards in the world? What is it, that thing? If you could create the perfect world, what does that perfect world look like for you? And how are you getting up every day to achieve that perfect world? That's your purpose-driven story. It's the thing that drives you no matter what happens in this world. That is what drives you every single day. And then there's those human interest stories, those stories about the people that you run into at the grocery store or getting food or whatever, in how strangers interact with each other, but there's a lesson in those stories that make you more relatable. And so when you're trying to determine what story you want to tell, each one of them has a different purpose. An origin story tells people who you are. A value story helps with branding and sales. A purpose story helps with a greater mission, getting people connected around a cause. And those human interest stories help people resonate with you. And when you're trying to determine what actually event that you want to talk about, again, it goes back to those emotions. When you're talking about those experiences, what is it that you need that audience to feel as you drive them to the next step? And you have a list of experiences that can take audiences through that emotional connection, and that's what leads them to the next step. So it's really just about getting it all down on paper and organizing it, and then kind of building your own library that you can go back to.
I wrote down something that you said,
Hmm.
which is events, emotions, and experiences.
Hmm. Yes.
Some
Events,
of
emotions.
our events in our lives, I'm assuming, are too emotional to share the
Hmm.
experience with others.
Hmm.
When do we know when it's okay to share those experiences or events that we've had in our lives that are full of emotion for us?
Hmm. I'm so glad that you asked this question, because I take the mental health component of my job very seriously. As you would imagine, people tell me some really incredible things. Um, how you determine if it's a story that you want to share or you need to share is, quite honestly, can you get through the story without breaking down and without reliving the experience? There is a difference between telling a story and having recall of those events, and telling the story and reliving the experience. I can tell a story. I'm a very emotional person. So any story that I can tell you, I'm going to get emotional about it, because that's just the way that I communicate. But if I am on the stage weeping and wailing and just going all in, what I have actually done is had a therapy session on my audience. And I don't have the right to do that. None of us as storytellers have a right to do that. First, understand every experience that you ever went through is not necessarily content. Well, it's not content. Every experience that you've gone through, you are not required to share with an audience. But if you choose to, you need to make sure that you have come out on the other side. There is a lesson that you have learned. There is some wisdom that you can give. Usually, when you're in the throes of it, you haven't learned anything to impart on anyone, which means that you're using your audience in the wrong context. And so, if you ever give a talk and you get emotional, or you're going through something, and the audience comes up to you and they're so sympathetic, or they're handing you a tissue, or they're really giving you hugs, not because of what you said, but because they're feeling for you, then that means that you have used them in the wrong way. And so you need to know when you have healed enough to recall, but not necessarily relive.
Okay, so let me just talk about that for a second, because how do you, I'm formulating this in your mind. There's times when I've told stories and I didn't realize it was going to go where it went.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was good and I was healed. And then after I told this, or in the middle of the story, in front of everybody that I was telling the story to, whether that be a Facebook Live or it be in front of a small group, something came up that I'd never thought about in that story. And I kind of went back and experienced it again, right? And so in those instances, the audience is coming up and saying, oh my gosh, and they're feeling it with you.
Mm-hmm.
What is the appropriate response for us to our audience when that happens? Because I think that happens to a lot of people, where they thought they were good, they thought they were healed, they thought they were on the other side, they had a few lessons learned out of it, but evidently by sharing that story, you're actually getting a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
Just talk to me about how to navigate that with your audience post, I guess is what I'm asking.
Okay. And in this experience, I want us all to honor our humanity, because humanity happens. And so you can be, as you're saying, in the midst of a story and then realize, okay, this is not necessarily where I want to be, not where I want to go, doesn't feel good. It's okay to step back from that and say to your audience, this isn't what I plan to share. This isn't what I plan to share. Let me back up. And I want to be able to honor you as my audience. And I want to be able to tell a story that I am completely healed from. I'm going to tell you that your audience, especially if you have a long-term audience or some audience that is coming with you emotionally, people will get it, because you're inviting them into your humanity. And you want to respect the fact that, hold on, I'm not quite healed from this. Let me take a couple steps back to get it together. And I don't want to put this on you guys. So let me just collect myself, and we're going to flip the script and we're going to go do something else. That is just being in control of your content, in control of your story, and also respecting your audience, because your narrative is yours and you want to make sure that you have control over it. You don't want to find yourself in a position that is hard for you to convey and press on, and then it becomes something that you really didn't want to share and you wanted to spend more time with it. And so honor those feelings for yourself, and honor that with your audience, and people will get it. They will get it.
So it's okay to stop telling a story.
It's absolutely okay. If you're not ready, you're not ready. And use some other device, use humor, use whatever you have in your tool bag. I'm like, no, we're gonna change that. We're gonna do something else that's not working. It's absolutely okay to do that.
I use humor a lot when I am telling a story that could be really super emotional to kind of
Mhm.
keep myself from going into those emotions while telling a story.
Mhm.
And I think that's appropriate for giving a story to an audience when
Mhm.
you're the speaker. There are times, though, when you do need to do the therapy and you do need to feel it and allow yourself to feel that.
Mhm.
That's prior to, right? That's prior to or outside of you're presenting the story as your brand.
Exactly.
I just
Yep,
want
it's
okay.
to. Yep, prior to. All of the work should be done prior to you presenting it as your brand story. Yeah.
How do you walk people through that process of knowing when it's enough? Do you have them tell you the story? Do you have them practice them on video? I mean, how do you suggest people kind of figure out, is this the time? Is this the right time to add the story in?
Mhm. Well, there is a checklist that I do with every client, specifically if they're going into something that's really heavy. And sometimes, as you said, we don't know that we're going there. I've had clients who've come to me and, excuse me, they believe that their story is one thing, and then once we get into the process of uncovering the story, it becomes something else. They unlock memories that they weren't aware of, or as we keep picking at it, they can see, okay, this is really truly the story, but that's the story that I am trying not to share. And what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of it, but I give my clients like a heads up that usually the story that's hidden behind the fear and the shame and the anger and the hurt is usually the story that needs to be told. But we have to see how strong that story is. So first, we will go through that checklist of determining what it is, if it's ready for public consumption. And so I do ask about a therapist, and I actually have a therapist who works on my team, and we talk about, is this something that they can tell? And then if they decide it's something that they want to tell, then we do practice it. We talk about it. We put it together in a way where you can linger in certain places. Like you can tell a very dramatic story, and based on where you put your emphasis in the details will determine what is triggered for you and what's not. You only need to get the audience to the emotion necessary to move them to the next step. And that does not always mean that you need to tell every single detail. You don't want it to be so sterile where you're just giving something quickly, but you do need to get them somewhere. And sometimes you can get through that without unlocking the trauma of it all, if you will.
Okay. So, enough of the story to move them to emotion
Mm-hmm.
without making them emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Or overly emotional?
Yes. Yep. That's exactly it.
We don't want to drown them in emotions. We
Yes.
want to stir their emotions. We don't want to drown them. We don't want to pour emotions on top of them, right? We don't want to like. um,
Exactly. You want to build it. Yes. But you just want to be like, oh, yeah, you want them to come alongside of you. You want to blur the line between your story and their experience. And you want them to be in it with you, but you also don't want the audience to go down deeper than where you want them to go because you have a responsibility to them. They're going to go where you take them. So whatever emotion that you are taking them through, they're going to go with you. So if you're going to take them down, you have to be able to bring them back up. And if you go too far down, it's going to be hard to bring them back to the place where you need to get them to buy your product or whatever it is, the reason that you're telling the story. So you have to be careful about how you do that. It's not hard to do at all. But you just have
Yeah.
to be careful. Yeah, it's not hard at all.
Can you give us a sample?
Of what exactly? We've talked about so
Of
much.
bringing your audience down and then remembering to bring them up. Like an example, either a good example or a like bad.
I will give you, let me think of how I want to do that. I will give you, can I give you this quick framework, and then it'll give me time to kind of think of going down and coming back up. Because one of the hardest parts for people for them to do is to tell their story. And so it's a 7-part way that I like to teach people to do that, because we get everything in and still be able to hit all the high points. So 1, you want to start with a hook, and that's drawing someone in immediately. What is it like when you read the first sentence of a book or a movie comes on, which sometimes not all movies do this, but you want to start with the hook. Then you want to give them some backstory. You know how a movie will come on and they'll start in one place and then they'll take you backwards to bring you forward? That's exactly what you want to do. So you've got your hook and your backstory. Then you want to drop them into the action. This is where the details is happening. This is where your breakthrough is happening. This is where you are giving them that emotion. And so this is where you're really starting to get into the meat of it. Number 4 is the moral of the story, because we really want to tell this story to leave them with something that they can use in their lives. So number 4 is where you have the moral of the story. The moral of the story may or may not be in the story itself, but the way that you've written it or the way that you speak it, they know what what the moral is by the time you get to the end. Number 5, this is the hero move. This is where you make the story about the audience. This is where, have you ever felt this way before? Is this something that has happened to you? Do you understand what I mean? That sort of thing. So then you do that. That's the hero move. Then number 6 is where you are going to make the offer, because now you have hooked them, you've given them the experience, you've made the hero move, and now you want to say, buy my thing, sign up for this, come see me at the back of the room. Whatever the offer is, join me on this quest, whatever the offer is. And then the 7th is closing the loop. Here is where you're going to loop back to the beginning and answer any questions that were unanswered in the other 5 parts. And so the 7th actually makes it into a bow. And it doesn't have to be a nice, neat bow. It can be a messy bow. It could be a completely ugly story that you told. But when you get to the 7th part, you're kind of looping back to the beginning. So the 7 parts, again, are the hook, the backstory, the action, the moral of the story, the hero's move, the spin, and then you want to close the loop. So those are the 7 parts. And that's how you would put a story together. And most of the time, if you follow that, you can get out with a really great story that will move your audience forward. Excuse me. So
You want me to mute you for a second? Go get some water. Do you need some water?
Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. So she's going to go get some water for a second. I'm going to give her a quick little break. I'm going to mute her microphone so we don't hear that in the background. Okay. So, when you're recording live, it's live. Like, this truly is a recorded live. And I will be editing this one, which normally I don't do a lot of editing, but today I'm editing. Oh, that'll be fun. I am gaining some, love for editing. It's happening. And it sounds like a lot of what Shereese has been sharing with us is editing our story, bringing our story to a place where when we tell it, it's edited in such a way that it makes the biggest impact on our audience. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for allowing me to do that. I had a little bit of a tickle in my throat.
Yeah, and
So,
it is such a pain when that's there.
um, so when you
So a
talk about,
sample, an example.
yes, an example. So one of the ways that I hone this technique that I use is because I worked in a domestic violence agency. And part of my job as the director of marketing was to write the stories that told the impact of the organization, but I also wasn't allowed really to use the names of the people that we were actually serving. So one example that comes to mind of being able to take the audience down and bringing them back up is where I told the story of a young girl who watched her dad being who watched her dad beat her mother with a hammer. And so as you're telling a story, especially when you're in an agency like domestic violence, people aren't necessarily giving their money to support the bottom or the violence. They're giving their money to support the joy or the rising of the hope. That's the word I'm looking for. And so we told this story of her mother, of her seeing her mother being beaten with the hammer. And so we're talking about her, and she's giving it to you about, being in the bedroom with her mother. Her dad comes in, he hits mother with the hammer, her being afraid and thinking that her mother was gone. And I was covered in blood, and I was afraid, and I wasn't sure where my younger brother was. And I ran out of the house to get help, but I realized that I didn't have on any shoes and I had to run back in, but my dad was still in the house. And so you're building that he was still in the house, and my mother was laying there, and I wasn't sure that she was alive or dead. What was I supposed to do? And so as you're taking people down into that, as a parent, you're like, oh my gosh. But what happens is that she did end up going back out to the neighbor's house, and her mother was alive, and her dad did go to jail. But what happened is that she came into our shelter, and as a result of coming into the shelter, they were able to get help where I'll say this after I say this. They were able to get help where she was able to get back into school and into a lot of therapy. We did not solve the problem, because that's not a problem that gets solved just because you come into a shelter. We
Yeah.
aimed it into what could be. And so when you're telling your stories or making your stories, you have to also be careful of that. We're very, very smart human beings and understand that we do not solve problems like that with a smile and a pat on the back. You're moving people into hope. And so if you have a story that's similar to that, you want to make sure that you're being authentic in how the end of it actually comes together. I hope that was a good enough example, but
Yeah. No,
okay.
that totally makes sense. No, that totally makes sense. So you bring them through it, so they're gonna feel that emotion in that
Yeah,
moment where you're telling the down part, right?
yeah,
Because like immediately I'm like, oh my god, like I was like,
yeah,
whoo, but oh wait, they came into the shelter, so mama's still alive and she's getting help, and okay, I can breathe. I can like relax into that, and I want to help give to that. Like I want to help another child who may be in that same situation to be
mhm,
able to get back in school and yeah,
yeah,
get the help that they need. I mean, getting that child the help that they need was like super hope, right? That's like super hope. That's like super, and you become the superhero in the story by
mhm,
giving to that because you're now helping somebody that yeah otherwise would be drowning in.
yeah,
Cool.
exactly.
love it. I love it. All right, I'm gonna do a recap,
Mhm.
and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put you full screen, and I'm gonna put up on the screen kind of the things that I pulled out, and I
Okay.
just want you to give, like, one little sentence about each of them, and we'll kinda
Okay.
go through that,
Okay.
and then we'll wrap up and we'll be done. So, let me make you full screen. Boop, ba-doop, boop, 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 ba-doop, boop. This is music to the setup, da, da, da. Oops. Okay, so I'm gonna say a couple of things. You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Alrighty. So y'all, this is Shereese Floyd. Where is this? I'm gonna start again. Set up music. Hey, 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 welcome to the beBOLDyou podcast where we are talking to Shereese Floyd-Thompson. She is of the Storymakers Consulting, and she helps people in turning their life experience into profitable brand stories. You can reach her by going to storymakerscommunity.com. I would love for you to do that. It would be very, very awesome. Your story is your brand. So I'm going to have her right now talk about these next little bits. Here we go. Over to you, Shereese.
Why do we need our brand? We need our brand because it is the way that helps us connect to our audience. It helps us resonate with our audience. And we're living in a time where people are spending more of their money with people who share the same values and belief systems. And this is the way that we have that human to human connection versus a transactional connection. Be your authentic self. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, be yourself, everyone else is taken. You're the only person on the planet that can do what you do in the way that you do it. And your story helps solidify that. No one can ever copy it. Decide to share your voice more than ever. Your voice matters. Again, you are a unique being unto yourself. No one can duplicate who you are. And so your voice is your calling card. Every story matters. Every single one of us has a set of experiences, expertise, and point of view that can help someone else realize that they are not alone on this planet. It is our job to help find those people. And brand stories are crafted from your whole story, the whole totality of your life. Every day that you have moved through this world is a part of your brand. And so you really want to make sure that you are crafting it from all of who you are and not just one thing. Your lessons learned don't belong to you. No, you're in a training ground. The things that are happening to you are happening for you to live out your purpose and your true intent on this planet. And once you have learned those lessons, that now gives you the expertise to give that lesson to someone else to help guide them through to their success. Only tell stories you want to tell. Your life is not a required open book for anyone. You only need to tell the stories necessary to move your audience to that next level in their story. Always bring your audience all the way. Yeah, every experience, every emotion that you feel, and tell your audience, we're going to feel it with you. And if you take us down, you have a responsibility to bring us back up.
Huh?
Hey. Start with a hook and draw them in. Nobody gets past your story if they are not drawn in from the first couple of seconds. So you have to make it good. What is it that you want to say to us, and say it to us with a bang? Give some context to your hook. Like, what is really going on? Draw me in with some of those details so I'm really on the edge of my seat waiting for the next part. The action. What was really going on in your world? Like, what was the breakthrough? How are you feeling? How did you get through some of those tough times? Give me some of the action so I can live that experience with you. And what's the real moral of the story? After you've told me what has happened to you, how can I take that information away and now apply it to my life? Is the story all about you? The hero move ensures that you make sure that you bring your audience in. It's not all about you. Give your audience the win so they know that they're a part of that story. Make that offer, take them on a journey. You have set them up perfectly to be able to take that next step with you. And then close that loop. Answer any questions that I might walk away with, like, oh, what happened here? Answer those questions for it. Give me a bow, even if it's messy, and let me know that that story is something that I can remember for years to come.
So I want to thank you, Shereese Floyd-Thompson, for joining us on the Be Bold You podcast today. And again, people can get to you by going to storymakerscommunity.com. So fun having you on the show today. Do you have any last, like, boom, this is what, if you could only say one thing to people, what would that be?
The core of my heart that I really do believe that the way to solve the world's problems is with our stories. We don't know each other. We don't understand that our differences is what really makes us unique, and it is the commonality that we have with each other. So get out into the world and share your story. The world needs it. You need it. There is no reason not to. And I really just implore you to understand how incredible you are, and just go out there and let the world know how incredible you are.
Thank you, girl. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for coming today.
You're welcome.
I am loving the connection that we made, and I'm loving Clubhouse for I have to thank Clubhouse for this one because it's the Clubhouse connection. Somebody I probably may never have connected with, and we both were we both love story. We love sharing my whole thing is I want to get people's message out. I want to help you to get your message out in ways that are easy for you. So thanks again, Shereese. And until the next time you're on the Be Bold You podcast. And for my friends and listeners, remember to always live your life out loud and be bold you.